Welcome David Caron from the University of Southern California. He was here yesterday, presented a great talk about some research they did on long-term monitoring and yes, do you want to hold it? Yeah, I did yesterday.
Great, thank you. Before we get started, I wanted to address a comment that was made over here. You said you had seen a bunch of these. Everybody comes in with the technology. They say they can fix it. It'll work like that. No problem. You're going to be suspicious. They'll say that. And yes, you're probably right. It's going to take multiple technologies to do something. So I think it's a good idea that you're looking at all these technologies. I'm also going to say that my affiliations are not in any way with AECOM. So you might wonder, what are you out there talking about? I know you know, and I will get into that. I showed this slide yesterday, or a version of it, and it's only to show that phosphorus release from the sediments is what it's all about. Effective hazard mitigation or management in clear has to address the root problem, and that root problem right now is overwhelmingly internal loads of nutrients, of phosphorus. Phosphorus that's already in the lake. If you don't do something about that, you're not going to solve this problem. You're just not going to take the place in your particular system anyway. I've been doing that research. I am a power researcher, and I've been doing it for more than 40 years. And I put up here some, not all, some of the main strategies that have been proposed and tried to address that. There are physical strategies of dredging, drawdown, skimming, aeration, oxygenation, all of these physical chemical means. There are chemical strategies, pure chemical strategies, algicides, organic and otherwise, clays, length modified clays and so forth, flocculants, and biological strategies have been proposed. There are tons of them. If you look those over, as I have, and I have personal experience with a lot of them, and I certainly research all of them, they kind of break up again into classes of approaches. And the ones in green up at the top are ones that will lower nutrient concentrations in the water bubble. Those are key. You have to bring down the internal nutrient loads, or you're not going to change the lake. Dredging, drawdown, extremely expensive if you can get it done. And then, with dredging, while it works in some places, you have to do something with all those soils, and there's a lot of it. And then you're uncovering new mud at the bottom, because the lake is very deep with mud. And so you've got more phosphorus down there. So it's unclear in a place like Clear, which isn't, how that's going to get you ahead. Skimming and harvesting, we're going to talk about. Harvesting. There are others that are kind of in the orangey color there that reduce nutrient and light availability, but they don't remove the nutrients. That's fine, and there are a number in these different three categories here. That's great if you can take them out of circulation for a very significant period of time, but the nutrients are still there in the system. They don't go away. You're just preventing them from being available to the phytoplankton for growth. And then there are others that will kill the biomass, just that ultrasound has been suggested. The algicides do this. They act quickly, they can deal with the problem quickly, but they leave the nutrients in the system. The fact is, there are pros and cons for every single one of these approaches. And understanding what those approaches can and cannot offer for your particular lake is the key to choosing the best and most cost-efficient approach. You have to know what you're getting into. So P.T. Barnum, famous circus carnival guy, had a famous saying that he said, "There's a sucker born every minute until you take them over." People are going to come. So if you've seen 10 technologies, you haven't seen a third. There are probably 30 various technologies out there, and somebody will try and tell you they will work. So all I'm saying is you have to be very careful how you apply them, because all of those technologies will work in some situations, and they will not work in other situations. And you have to pick and choose carefully. The other point here is that very few approaches reduce the internal nutrient loading, and that is the only true solution in a lake like Clear. We heard a question about, geez, we've got algae in the lake. We don't want to reduce the algae. If there is a lake that could stand reduction of nutrients, it is Clear Lake. You are not going to destroy a food lake. I can guarantee you. You're not going to bring it from a hyper-eutrophic state to an oligotrophic state where you can see the bottom of the lake. It's just never going to happen. And that's not the goal. You have a system that has been teetering, if you think of it that way, kind of teetering on the floor. It's like a seesaw on the kids' playground. And the ecosystem has been in one position for quite a long time, up until about maybe a decade and a half ago. But there have been enough nutrients put into the system that it is slid into a different stable equilibrium with cyanobacteria and often toxic ones now dominating the system. And the key is not to remove all the phosphorus and kill everything. The key is to get that ketone to just spin the other way. So the key is removing just enough nutrients to make the system work the way it worked 50 years ago. You don't have to go back 150, you don't have to go back to ancient times. Just enough so that you're not running into a problem. The corollary with this is very few approaches don't affect into nutrient loads, is that if it's not addressed, the things you will hear called management are really what I would call long-term mitigation strategies. Mitigation is you got a problem, you come in, you zap it, you do something that fixes it, probably for the short term. Management is a way of dealing with it in a long-term situation where you're not having to go back and continually hit things with something in order to try and knock the system away from the state that it's in. So it means that if you have one of these long-term mitigation strategies, you're not removing nutrients from the system, you're killing things or preventing the nutrients from becoming available. If that approach actually is effective, which is typically a big if, the treatments can never stop. You have to keep going. If you stop, the nutrients are still there, they come back in the food web, and you're back to your stuff. I think that's really important to keep in mind. I also showed this slide last time, and I'm not going to belabor this. Nitrogen and phosphorus are really two elements we worry about. They're typically limiting. Phosphorus we usually go after because you can't really change phosphorus. Phosphorus atom is a phosphorus atom. Nitrogen, there's atmospheric nitrogen in 80% of our atmosphere that the cyanobacteria can cash in on through the process of nitrogen fixation. So phosphorus typically is what you're after. Okay, so this is the AECOM harvester. If you were over at the poster session yesterday, there were a couple of posters on it. And Dan and Tammy are in the crowd here. If you have technical questions, you can ask them. But suffice it to say that the way this works is you bring water into the system, you use coagulants to kind of bunch up the algae, if you will. They are then floated in the system. You skim off that scum, which is what we saw on the previous slide, that real thick sludge material, and you create clear water that you then can send back to the lake. In the process of doing that, what's the big deal? Well, this is information from from a pilot study they did in Lake Agawam, where they did that in Lake Agawam. You can see here, these are microsystems, and they go up to about 45 or so micrograms per liter. They were able, by passing the water, once through their system, they reduce the microsystems in the system by more than 99%, and they reduce the chlorophyll, the phytoplankton that are present in there, by more than 99%. That is a pretty amazing yield, which is why, as I have scientists, I'm really interested to see if this will work. And that would be my role. This is a VRC-approved project. There's no money yet, but if and when it runs, I would do monitoring to my group independently from the company, because companies will always tell you they've done a great job and they'll leave you the data to show it. However, it's great when you can get independent monitoring to make sure that it is actually working. And the water that you saw here, this was water going into the system, water coming out. And it goes right back, it's oxygenated, and it goes right back into the lake. Just to give you an idea of what this could do for clear. This is a series of pilot studies that they ran in places of different tropes. You can tell by the amount of phosphorus that's present in the system, the green bars, and then the blue bars indicate what they were able to reduce it to by passing it through their system. A couple things here. First of all, you see a range, but the worst they do is they get about 80%. That 80% of the biomass containing 80% of the nitrogen, 80% of the phosphorus, 80% or more of the microsystems, everything that's in there, particulate, is coming out and going into that sludge and going wet. The other thing that's great here is that you see as the system is more eutrophic, you get a better percentage. Here in Okeechobee, in Florida, they got 90% of the material, or 97% of the material removed. Clear is, on a balloon is way up here somewhere. It's way off scale. So you can expect 95 to 99% of the material that's going to get taken out, which again is why as a cap scientist I'm kind of excited. Well, let's look forward. I have to say, Alicia, we can talk a bit, or I didn't understand all your calculations of how you figured out what this would do, but we did calculations in a different way. Remember, we don't have to get all the phosphorus out of this system, nor do we want to. We want this to be a productive lake. We simply don't want it to be producing toxic algae. That's not so good. If you look at the numbers here, and I just split it because there's a break here. If you look at all the phosphorus, and this is total phosphorus on this axis, and if you look at all those numbers after basically 1998, post 1997, they average about 0.16 milligrams per liter. Prior to that, all those years, those are the data points involved, it's 0.12 milligrams per liter on average. Again, if you take the difference there, that's only 0.04 milligrams per liter. This is your lake prior to harmful algal blooms. This is your lake when the harmful algal blooms came. This seesaw doesn't have to seesaw that much in order to be able to take enough out of the lake so that hopefully the system will be able to reset at a trophic state that will not induce cyanobacteria and toxic algae or toxic cyanobacteria to grow. Okay. That roughly equates to about 6 harvesters working for half a year for 10 years. Just to give you an indication, it would have the potential to take out that much. Now, the way the harvester works, I showed you that efficiency goes up as the trophy goes up. Actually, the amount of material in the lake water goes up. So it might work only when there's big blooms, and that would be okay too. Okay, so the VOC proposed pilot is to be done at Clear Lake. And that's a great place because that end of the lake in the lower arm is a mess during the summer, so it's a great spot. It is a pilot. It's only to demonstrate the efficacy of the approach. And that is pretty much what we're trying to do. The idea would be to pull water from the lake where it's all goopy and dump it into an area that's semi-cordoned off so that in essence what you would be able to see is you should see if it works. That's what I intend to try and find out. It pushes that material out that's in there and replaces it with that clear water. Just a demo to show the principle works. It replaces it with the water coming from the machine that's been cleaned. The water comes in, the vast majority of the water passes through the system, the algae are floated up and skimmed off, and that oxygenated clean water goes right back to where we want it to go, back into the lake. So if you look forward then, again, one possible scenario for kind of a whole lake approach, Tammy put this together. We've kind of thought about how you might build this out from where the demo site is, including a larger part of the lake. Ultimately, the information that comes from the pilot study is really needed before you can calculate how do we do this on a whole lake basis. But the idea is these are essentially modular units. This is a little trailer truck size thing. And you can put as many of these up in an area where you can get power to it, and you could essentially have a processing plant that would really produce a lot of fresh water that we'll feed. Okay, so there are multiple benefits to this approach, and that's why I'm personally excited about it. After 40 years of going through technologies and going, this can actually work. It could reduce the phosphorus concentration as well as the microsystems, as well as the nitrogen, in Clear Lake in order to have an impact. You have removal of cyanobacterial and algal biomass and everything they contain. Water clarification and oxygenation, nutrient removal, nitrogen and phosphorus. Remember, the key word here is reducing internal loads. You've got to reduce those internal loads. And believe me, you can't possibly reduce them enough to destroy the food web. I know there's this worry, but that worry is unfounded. As a biologist, just isn't possible. Cyanotoxin removal of other contaminants. You do have some in the lake, and this, well, if they come up with a biomass, then they're out. Enhanced tab monitoring, which will be independently conducted. That would be the role of my group, and it would provide additional phytoplankton toxin characterizations, at least during the pilot study. And then byproducts from the processing can be removed. You can do other things with them. You don't necessarily have to create a bunch of microsystem-rich waste. There are ways of processing that and destroying the cyanotoxin. And I won't get into those, but it's another plus. And then it would provide the information that's really necessary in order to evaluate and whether it is feasible at a whole lake study level. And that is something that anything that you do out there is going to be expensive, but, that's part of the formula. You have to look at the cost efficiency, compare what it's doing, what it's not doing, compared to the costs that they're paying for. And as I said, the problem is if you've got anything that is not reducing energy from the system, you have the potential of them coming back the second you stop whatever you're doing. So even though the TMDL is in place, Clear Lake has sufficient internal loads of nutrients right now to promote recurring toxic blooms indefinitely. You don't have to have another phosphorus atom enter the lake. There's enough already here. There's too much. Reducing the internal loads is fundamental. If you want to bring down the magnitude and the frequency of those blooms, we don't have to go back to 1492. We have to go back of probably about a decade and a half in terms of the amount of phosphorus to have some in. Most mitigated or management location strategies or approaches don't really address the internal incidents, and that's the problem. Even if they're effective, you have to carry them out in perpetuity. So keep that in mind. That has a cost. And then I would say that maybe it's time to directly address those internal loads and try something that might really improve the water quality. I think that's it.
So I really like the conversation, and I value some questions. I just want to let the webinar folks know. I did ask for an extension and hear back, so we might get kicked off at the webinar folks at 5:30. And we do have one more talk. And what I'm going to do is work with that presenter, which is Alicia, later, and have you record that talk separately. So when we do the online digital binder, it'll be there. Okay. And I do apologize for people going late, but I want to make sure we still go. So, are there any questions for David while I set up the next presentation? Over there on the side of the room. I'm going to give you guys the mic to self-manage here. Do this.
So the concentration more the concentration phosphorus on the lake bed percentage is around 1,500 ppm, between 1,000 and 2,000 ppm. How this reduce the concentration of phosphorus on the lake bed by removing it and not cycling? But what's your prediction for how many cycles it would take to get down below 1,000? And even if it's 1,000 ppm on the lake bed, would you still get phosphorus at least during an off-season?
Great question. And the answer is it's unknown. So basically what's been said is that the phosphorus in the sediment is great. You remove the phosphorus from the water column by skimming off all the algae. More phosphorus comes up and grows more algae. You skim that off too. The question is how many times do you have to do that before you actually make a dent in the phosphorus on the bottom? And that's unknown. It's as unknown as if you're going to oxygenate the bottom. How much phosphorus can you actually keep in the bottom sediments by oxygenating? You can keep some of it there, but even if 10% of what's down there gets up, it can still cause a major bloom. So these are all questions where these pilot studies, Sierra gets the money from them all. Really fundamental. They should all be done. I wasn't kidding when I said every single one of those techniques up there can be effective in some ways and times, and ineffective in others. And it will probably be some combination of them that would be used in order to do this. So I can imagine, for example, if you've got an algae harvester's working to keep the surface clean, maybe you drop Nutrisoil on the bottom and you bind up what's on the bottom there. Don't let it get out. Those kinds of thinking outside the box and thinking in combination are going to be necessary to address the process. You might.
As far as where this technology has been used before, what types of bodies of water were they used in, and how similar or different are they from clearly?
I can answer from what I know about those environments. Dan or Tammy can probably answer that in more detail. The one you saw on the far left, Okeechobee, where they had very high efficiency of removal, it's probably, Tammy can say, I would consider that, even worse state than clear in terms of just the magnitude of that problem. But they're comparable. It's a hyperneutrophic environment. You don't have to worry about the morally neutrophic environments that love that because you're not there. And you're not going to be there. So I think the efficiency of these biomass removed will be greatest in clear during the time when you're having blooms where they all aggregate down to the east end of the lower pond. I've seen those where you can almost walk across. And that's ideal because you've almost got a sludge right there. So it's hard to say exactly, because they're different algorithms too.
How would it be provided to these harvesters?
Sorry.
How do they get out?
For the pilot, the plan is for seed, for their land to provide power.
Oh, so it's going to be from shore. Okay.
Thank you very much, David.